Good afternoon, everybody who is watching or listening right now, whether you are listening to the replay or listening to me live. It is a great day. It's Wednesday, February the 7th, 2018, and I want to go ahead and get started. I didn't do a live stream on Monday. Mostly because I was still overcoming a little. I was hoping it wasn't the flu, and it wasn't, but it was a little cold that I had, and I didn't want to sit on the live stream coughing and sniffing and all this other stuff in the microphone. So I just decided, okay, let me just chill today, and I'll be back at it on Wednesday. So here I am, and I really like how things appear to be growing, whether it's on Periscope, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on my blog, Black and Intellectual, which I want everybody to go there and check that out, because I have all of my writings there. So a lot of stuff that I don't talk about or don't get around to talking about on YouTube, I write about on my blog. So, and then I post a lot of my videos on my blog as well. So definitely check out blackandintellectual.com. So let's get started, shall we? This is going to be a short show. This is not going to be as long of a show as the last show I did, which was on Friday, which was about an hour and a half long, because I had a lot that I needed to get off my chest. This show is going to be, I'm shooting for maybe around 30-40 minutes. We're going to see how it goes. And I want to start out by talking about the Philadelphia riot, the Philadelphia post Superbowl riot that took place after the Philadelphia Eagles defeated the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl, which I did not watch. I participated in the protest. I don't know how much of an impact that actually had. I haven't even checked to see what the ratings were, because quite honestly, I really don't care. Especially with the way that the NFL has been conducting itself, so, but I was on social media, and I was on Twitter, I was on Facebook, so because I knew people would update, with different trailers and different goings-ons, at the time. So I'm gonna actually talk about the MLK, how Dodge used Martin Luther King's voice in an ad to sell trucks. That's going to be the third story I talk about. But first, I want to talk about the riot itself. So after they won the Super Bowl, which I'm glad they won, because I don't like the Patriots, and I'm not really hating on them, but I'm tired of that team. I think they do a lot of shady stuff, and they're always caught up in some sort of controversy. And I don't know, when you add in the whole factor of paid patriotism in the NFL, and how they do this whole mandatory, the singing of the national anthem, and the whole flyover with the Jets, and the whole paid patriotism, forced patriotism crap really irks me with the NFL. And of course, obviously, how they force, or they want to force, the players to take or stand for the national anthem. Of course, they really can't force them to do that, because players have their First Amendment rights. But it's mighty interesting how before the riot occurred, you had some Black Lives Matter activists and some people who were affiliated with them who decided to go out there and help them with their protest. 17 of them were arrested. Now, they were blocking traffic, yes, but, and that's not really safe, especially where right now we're in this age where people are liking to commit acts of terrorism by using their cars to run over people. So it's really not a safe thing to do, but they are putting their lives on the line by being out there and doing that. And like I said, 17 of them were arrested. Now, get this. Only 3 rioters out of all the thousands of people that rioted after the game was over, 3 of them were arrested. So you had three predominantly white. It was a mostly white crowd out there. Yeah, you had some black people out there who were joining along with the rioting, but for the most part, it was mostly white folks out there. And obviously, in typical situations like this, the demeanor of the state completely changes based on the racial makeup of the people involved in the riot itself. And it's not balanced at all. And it just goes to show you the deep-seated and ingrained double standards that exist right now in this country. Hold on, what is this? Okay, never mind. I'm checking something out. Checking out my settings. Like always, something is always flashing up saying that there's a warning. But yeah, like, it's absolutely crazy. And peep the usage of words, because the media and the words that they use purely to just even describe what's going on completely changes based on the racial makeup of the people involved. Like, so, you know, there were these anchors, these news anchors. Well, and I think they were local news affiliates. And they were laughing and cutting up and saying, yeah, you know, using all sorts of like apologetic rhetoric for really violent actions that were going on. And I'm not saying I want the police to treat them like they treat us. They just shouldn't be treating us the way they do. But it just goes to show you how there is a very clear privilege at work here that people are conscious about. We have to ignore this. We have to get out of this thing where we keep thinking that people are not knowledgeable of their biases. Some people might not be, but a lot of people are. A lot of people know they're full of you know what, and they don't really care because that's the way they really want it. So I even saw on one of the articles that was written about this, I even saw a clip of some police officers like smack dab in the middle of the riot. You had these police officers that were like high-fiving the rioters and just like cheesing like ear to ear head with these big Kool-Aid grins on their face, just completely not taking anything seriously. And apparently, you know, if you believe what was on social media, some people were apparently monitoring the dispatch, and in some cases, like, the cops were going a little crazy. They were like, hey, like, these people are hanging off of light poles, and these people are acting all wild and crazy, and they're putting people's lives at risk by doing this. Like, they were starting fires, they were turning cars over. There was a video of some guy eating feces off the ground. Like, people were losing their damn minds. And, like, I still remember, and I know a lot of you guys remember this, I still remember when thousands of Penn State students rioted after Joe Paterno, the former head coach of the Penn State Lions, was fired after he was exposed for participating in the cover-up of the massive pedophile ring that Jerry Sandusky, which I think was like, he was affiliated with the Penn State Lions. I think he was like some sort of coordinator or something. But the massive pedophile ring that Jerry Sandusky was involved in. I know y'all remember that story. And when they fired Joe Paterno, them white kids, them white students lost their damn minds. They were tearing up shit left and right. And you didn't see tanks. You didn't see tear gas. The complete reaction of the state was entirely different. So, you know, that just goes to show you they really don't like us. That's really honestly what it boils down to. If you are black, or even if you're white, I'd say, and you are protesting police misconduct and police corruption and state corruption, and how the state covers up a lot of these crimes, they treat you like you're an enemy combatant. You know, they bring out the assault weapons. And they bring out the tanks on you. But, you know, if you if you want to burn up your own, where are the fathers at? If you want to burn up your own neighborhood and over a football game or something completely irrelevant like a head coach being fired, something that has no real bearing on anybody, okay, outside of the people who are getting paid to protect those people, they're the only ones who are losing something. But I don't know. It's just the double standards are just glaring, and we're at a crisis. Like, we're at a turning point right now in this country where there's a real crisis of identity, where a lot of people are having to deal with these blatant double standards and false realities that exist in this country, purely to protect certain groups of people and certain classes of people that aren't used to protect other people who are disadvantaged. And it's just, it's just very telling. And I'm not going to spend too much on that particular story, but I just thought that was very interesting. So let's move on to the next topic of discussion. Now, it's Black History Month, and because it's Black History Month, I'm doing something special this month. I was gonna start it on Monday, but like I said, I was under the weather, so I didn't get a chance to do it on Monday. But every live stream I do, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 12 p.m., every live stream, I'm going to focus on a new or a different Black intellectual from the past, from Black history, from African American history. And the person that I wanted to start with today is an intellectual that really inspired me in many ways to look at the world completely different. There are very few people whose writings that I've read, even like when it comes to MLK, Martin Luther King, who I'm going to talk about in the next story, and Malcolm X, there are very few who I've read their writings, and I felt like my life changed after reading what they wrote. And their opinions opened me up to a whole new reality that I didn't even know was out there. That is the type of impact that W.E.B. Du Bois had on me. And I started really, really reading Du Bois. Of course, I heard about him like years ago, but I didn't start really reading a lot of his stuff until maybe about a couple years ago when I started Black and Intellectual. And Du Bois, like, if you go on Black and Intellectual and you go back and you look at some of my oldest writings involved Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and the rivalry they had with Marcus Garvey. And not so much Booker T. I don't believe he said much about Garvey, but Du Bois definitely had a lot to say about him. Because I want to say Booker T was dead before Garvey really exploded like that. But I like Du Bois for a number of reasons. Not just because he was a Black intellectual, obviously, Black intellectual, but because he had such a fulfilling life. He saw so much, and most importantly, Du Bois perfectly bridges two divides, especially divides that I see on the left. Usually on the left, you have two groups of people, and this might be an oversimplification, but a lot of people fall into two camps. You either have people who want to overemphasize race, and you have people who want to overemphasize class and economics. And what I've always maintained and what I've always believed is that the truth is somewhere in between. It's really more so. Hold on one second. okay, here we go. It's really more so like a Venn diagram, okay, where in one circle you have race, in the other circle you have class. But the most important thing is how those two bubbles interact and coexist. And W.E.B. Du Bois, he wasn't the only intellectual who balanced both perfectly, but man, he really did it in ways that a lot of people, even today, a lot of people in the past and in the present, don't always do. And I believe, you know, he had the perfect combination of everything. He could talk about race and he could talk about class. He could talk about the horrors of white supremacy. And he could talk about what he used to call industrial imperialism. And for those who don't know, Du Bois was a lot of things. He was a Pan-Africanist. You know, he spoke on the necessity for black people across the globe, across the diaspora, to become economically commingle. My nose is still a little stuffed up from my sickness, you know, but so I might be sniffing a little bit if you hear that in the microphone. That's what that is. But yeah, like, so I want to read a few things from Du Bois, because most of the time when it comes to Du Bois, most people know about two things. Alright, sorry about that. Most people know about two things. Most people know about man, my sinuses are acting up. Most people know about either his book that he wrote in 1903, which served in many ways as an autobiography, and it was called The Souls of Black Folk. And that was, like I said, that was written in 1903. And a lot of people also know about his theory called the Talented Tenth. And you can read the Talented Tenth online. It's available open source. It's one of his most well-known writings, right? And that was also written in 1903. Man, my nose is all kinds of messed up. Hold on. That was written in 1903 as well. But a lot of people don't know about his autobiography that he wrote in 1940. You see, because Du Bois lived such a long life, he died in 1960 in Accra, in Ghana. Woo! He died in 1960 in Accra, Ghana. But his writing spans so much more than the Talented Tenth and the Souls of Black Folk. If you guys really want to get in deep with a lot of the stuff that he wrote, I advise you to buy a book from the Library of Congress. It's over 1,000 pages long. It has 3 books that he wrote. The Suppression of the African Slave Trade, The Souls of Black Folk, which I mentioned a second ago, and Dusk of Dawn. That's the 1940 autobiography that is really underrated. A lot of people have not read it. I'm not sure if it's available online. It might be. And then it has a collection of his essays that he wrote for the Crisis. You see, he had his own publication. And this publication was around for several decades, if I'm not mistaken. And he wrote about all sorts of things. Because, like I said, he lived such a fulfilling life, and there's so much that he saw. So, the last chapter of Dusk of Dawn, his 1940 book, with the last chapter is titled Revolution. And it touches on socialism and Marxism, and how those two ideologies influenced his political thinking at the time. Because not only was he a Pan-Africanist, but he was also a socialist. He was, putting a label onto him, I think, would be kind of difficult because I think he had a number of very leftist economic leanings. But I want to read this passage to you. It's on page 761. And I can easily talk about Du Bois from the point of view of race and racism, but I want to talk about Du Bois from the point of view of class right now, and some of the things that he said about economics, because that stuff is extremely important. And he had a lot to say that would shock some people. I wrote a whole article. I'll provide the link in the description box beneath this video. I wrote a whole article in 2016 entitled, where is it at? Let me pull it up. 8 W.E.B. Du Bois quotes that will blow your mind. Okay, I get a lot of traffic to this particular page, mostly because it ranks highly on Google in the Google search engine. It ranks on the first page, so I get a lot of clicks from it. And I'm not going to go over every quotation because I wrote quotations. I write quotations in long form. I don't just write 3-sentence quotes and stuff like that, because a lot of times you don't really get the full breadth of what that particular person was actually saying. So I write in long form. But there's a couple quotes in particular that I want to read to you from this article that I wrote in 2016. But before I do that, I want to read this passage from Revolution, from the chapter Revolution in Dusk of Dawn. Check this out. It says, I think it was the Russian Revolution which first illuminated and made clear this change in my basic thought. It was not that I at any time conceived of Bolshevik Russia as ushering in any sort of or any present millennium. So he's saying it's not that I saw Bolshevism as the be-all end-all. He says I was painfully sensitive to all of its failures, to all the difficulties which it faced. But the clear and basic thing which appeared to me in unquestioned brightness was that in the year 1917, and then after a struggle with the world and famine 10 years later, one of the largest nations of the world made up its mind, frankly, to face a set of problems which no nation was at the time willing to face, and which many nations, including our own, are unwilling fully to face even to this day. And what's important about, and this is me talking now, what's important about this whole quote is how pertinent a lot of this stuff that this dude was writing this 100 years ago. Well, actually, Dusk of Dawn was written in 1940, but he's talking about his sentiment from around like 1910, 1920. So like I said, that was like 100 years ago. So peep how pertinent a lot of this stuff still is today. And I'll continue. Those questions involve the problem of the poverty of the mass of men in an age when an abundance of goods and technical efficiency of work seem to be able to provide a sufficiency for all men, so that the mass of men could be fed and clothed and sheltered, live in health. He's talking many ways about universal health care. That's how ahead of his time he was. And have intellectual faculties trained. Russia was trying to accomplish this by eventually putting into the hands of those people who do the world's work the power to guide and rule the state for the best welfare of the masses. It made the assumption, long disputed, that out of the downtrodden mass of people, ability and character sufficient to do this task effectively could and would be found. I believed this dictum passionately. So he said, like, all of this stuff that they were talking about in Russia, about the, you know, the masses and universal health care and controlling the workforce and the labor force. He was like, I believed in all of that stuff passionately. It was, in fact, the foundation stone of my fight for black folk. It explained me. Okay, this is what Du Bois is saying in 1940 about his sentiment in 1910 and 1920. And here's the last chapter. I had been brought up with and this is the most important part, I had been brought up with the democratic idea that this general welfare was the object of democratic action in the state, of allowing the governed a voice in government. But through the crimson illusion of war, he's talking about the world wars, I realized, and afterward by travel around the world, saw even more clearly that so-called democracy today was allowing the mass of people to have only limited voice in government. That democratic control of what are at present the most important functions of men, work and earning a living and distributing goods and services, that here we did not have democracy. So he's saying in industry, in class within class, we don't have democracy. He says, continued, we have oligarchy, and oligarchy based on monopoly and income. And this oligarchy was as determined to deny democracy in industry as it had once been determined to deny democracy in legislation and choice of officials. Wow. That is potent. W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about oligarchy and plutocracy 100 years ago. We're talking about that stuff still to this day. This is how deep this man was. Du Bois was no joke. Like I consider him like, and I know he lived a long time ago, and a lot of his writings are dated. And even Du Bois, he lived so long that his views changed over time. Like, he wrote about stuff he wrote about stuff in 1899 that when 1940 rolled around, he didn't have those same views anymore. But I mean, that's what you would expect when you live as long as somebody like he did. Okay, and when you have such a fulfilling life, and when you see as much as Du Bois saw, okay, you're gonna change your views eventually. So I have something else that I want to read to you. Something else that he wrote. And like I said, everybody, please check out this article on Black and Intellectual. 8 quote, like I'm gonna reread the title to you. 8 W.E.B. Du Bois quotes that will blow your mind. And I say that for a reason, because they blew my mind. I'm like, why didn't I learn about this in elementary school? Why didn't I learn about this in high school? Hell, I didn't even learn about this in college. And I have a college degree. I took African American history. I even minored in history. My college minor degree was in history. Okay, and I didn't know about this stuff until because I taught myself. I didn't know about this stuff until after I left college, and that's kind of messed up. But hold on, where I have to find the quote specifically, because Du Bois wrote about a lot of stuff. He wrote about the unconstitutional acts against black people. Something that, if y'all hear me talk a lot about unconstitutional illegal acts against black people and unconstitutional illegal acts against black people, the reason why I talk about that so much is because I'm like channeling the soul or the spirit of Du Bois, not literally, but in concept and in theory. I'm channeling Du Bois because Du Bois wrote about the unconstitutional acts of lynching and things like that. He wrote about what he called the Tuskegee machine and controlled black opposition. Okay, he took like one of the reasons why Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were beefing. One of the reasons why they really butted heads with each other, okay, is because Du Bois saw Booker T. Washington as a stooge. Now, like you could debate that. Like I'm not saying Booker T. Washington didn't have any ideas that were not valid, but Booker T. Washington, he was more of the conservative of his time period in many ways. You know, he would go around advocating that black people shouldn't protest. This was during the age of lynching. Like black people were literally being hung from trees, and Booker T. Washington was going around saying black people shouldn't protest. And he said Du Bois had this whole thing where he didn't believe black people should seek higher education and go to college and get educated. And Du Bois completely, he didn't agree with that at all. Because Du Bois, his whole thing was the talented 10th. So he thought, he saw education as a way for black people to advance themselves. But Du Bois also was one of the founders of the NAACP. A lot of people know that as well, but, so Du Bois wrote about controlled black opposition and about how Booker T. Washington was taking money from people like Andrew Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller to spin a certain narrative in the black community, and they were buying up a lot of black-owned businesses, and they were buying up a lot of black-owned newspapers, and basically getting a lot of those black newspapers to not talk about some of the stuff that was going on at the time. It was real deep, okay, and Du Bois called that mess out. He talked about racial and economic oppression. He talked about, like I said earlier, industrial imperialism. He had a very powerful economic voice that should not be slept on. He was a beast in this regard. In many ways, Martin Luther King was a beast when it came to economics too, and a lot of people mention that. I was just talking about that not too long ago when MLK Day came around. But Du Bois, and I wouldn't be surprised if King got a lot of his stuff from Du Bois, and that's actually true in many cases because King was aware of Du Bois, and so King got a lot of his stuff from W.E.B. Du Bois. King got a lot of his stuff from Garvey. A lot of people don't know that. So let me read this to you guys. This quote also comes from the Chapter Revolution in his 1940 book Dusk of Dawn. And this is what W.E.B. Du Bois said about plutocracy. And for those who don't know, plutocracy is basically rule of... my voice is getting high-pitched for some reason. Plutocracy is ruled by the rich, and ruled by corporations, and ruled by industry. And so he was talking about plutocracy, he was talking about democratic socialism, and he was talking about what he called the basic American black creed. So he said, and I quote, "I stood, as it seemed to me, between two paths, diverging to extreme, these are the two paths. Extreme communism on one end, and violence on the other hand. And extreme reaction, or let me start over. I stood, as it seemed to me, between paths diverging to extreme communism and violence on the one hand, and extreme reaction to plutocracy on the other. I saw the disaster for American blacks and following a set determination to ignore race hate and nearing instead a creed of eventual violence and revolution. We had got to prepare ourselves for a reorganization of society, especially and fundamentally in industry. And for that reason, we had to work as a group toward the socialization of our own wealth and the establishment of such social objects in the nation and in the world." He said the socialization of black wealth, basically. And he had several bullet points. This is on page 774. Let me see. Okay, I can't find it in the book, but he had several bullet points, and I only have 3 listed here in the quotes. This is B. So the second bullet point. He says, we repudiate all artificial and hate engineering deification of race separation as such, but just as sternly, we repudiate an enervating philosophy if black escape into an artificially privileged white race which has long sought to enslave, exploit, and tyrannize over all mankind. So he's saying we repudiate the artificial nature of race separation. So he's basically talking about segregation. So he's saying we repudiate segregation, but we just as sternly repudiate any philosophy of black escape into privileged, into some artificially privileged white racial hierarchy, which has long sought to enslave, exploit, and tyrannize over all mankind. So he's like, look, yeah, we don't like segregation. We're not segregationists. We're not advocating for that. But at the same time, we shouldn't be rushing to, jump and join them, and they're running around the world enslaving and exploiting and terrorizing and having, propping up these tyrannical regimes all over the world. So Du Bois, like, decades before King even got around to saying it, because King, wasn't really born yet. And if he had been born, he was really young. But the same thing King said after integration, when he was like, I feel like I've, what was the quote? I feel like I've integrated my people into a burning house, or something along those lines, where he was starting to realize that social integration without economic integration would create a scenario where black people would become overly dependent on these systems of exploitation and systems of oppression, in the black community. And that's exactly what's happened. Du Bois was saying the same thing back in the 30s and 40s. Du Bois was saying the same exact thing decades before King was saying that. He was saying, yeah, we repudiate separation of the races. We're not separatists. We don't advocate for segregation. But at the same time, we shouldn't be rushing to integrate with these questionable forces either. I just find that very interesting. Here's the next one. He said, we believe that the labor force and intelligence of 12 million people, he's talking about black people, the labor force and the intelligence of 12 million people is more than sufficient to supply their own wants and make their advancement secure. Therefore, we believe that if carefully and intelligently planned, a cooperative black industrial system in America can be established in the midst of and in conjunction with the surround national industrial organization, and in an intelligent accord with that reconstruction of the economic basis of the nation, which must sooner or later be accomplished. Wow. Like, if I had I need to get some audio, some audio sounds to play, like flames and something like that, when something real good information like that gets played, because that's really powerful what he just said. Well, not just said, but what he said decades ago, advocating for black co-ops and black basically black industry. He's saying a cooperative black industrial system. So not just black businesses. We don't just need black businesses. We need black industry. We need a whole entire black industrial system. This is the stuff that Du Bois was talking about years ago. And then lastly, he said, we believe in the ultimate triumph of some form of socialism the world over. This is where, Du Bois's democratic socialism is coming out. He says that is common ownership and control of the means of production and equality of income. And so, like I said, that was And those things, as well as some other things that I'm not even going to go over because it would take too long, that is what Du Bois called the basic American black creed. Okay, and yeah, so that was Du Bois. I was going to read what he wrote about industrial imperialism, but I'm going to leave that for you guys to read on the blog. Like I said, check out this article that I wrote way back. Where's the date at? August the 26th of 2016. Okay, so over a year ago. 8 W.E.B. Du Bois quotes that will blow your mind. You can honestly just type that into Google, or you can wait for me to post this video, or for this video to be posted on YouTube, and you can get the link that way. So yeah, that's why I wanted to bring up Du Bois. He's, I wanted to mention him first for Black History Month because he's one of my favorite intellectuals. Arguably, he might be my favorite intellectual. Because as long ago as he lived, so much of what he wrote still bears fruit today. So, let me hurry up. I lied when I said I was going to do this for 30 or 40 minutes. It is 12:44. Let me hurry up and get through these last two topics. So, I wanted to touch on the MLK Dodge ad really quickly. I don't have much to say about it. Other than I find it very strange that the King estate would authorize Dodge to use King's, a quote from King, a very good quote actually from Dr. King. And some of this stuff isn't even on YouTube. So some of King's speeches are on YouTube. A lot of the stuff that he said, though, like a lot of his private stuff, that stuff is still kept by the King Center, and they keep that, well, not the King Center, but the King Estate. And they keep a lot of that stuff under wraps, and I just find it very strange how they let Dodge use that stuff, and they didn't let Ava DuVernay use it for Selma. I just find that very strange. That's really the only way that I can really describe that. And specifically, it was Dexter King and MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. the third. Well, that doesn't make sense. Martin Luther King the third. Okay, so on Twitter, the King Center came out and said, hey, we didn't have anything to do with this. The King Center and Bernice King were not involved in allowing the usage of his words to promote consumerism. Okay, and that's the problem that everybody has with this ad. It's that, I don't think it's necessarily that a King quote was used in a commercial. It's that the purpose of the commercial was to sell damn trucks. That's the reason, like, that goes against everything Dr. King stood for. He was against consumerism. He was against his words being used in the wrong way and being used, and well, he was against certain things being used improperly in his name. Okay, and it's just disgusting that they would use a speech to sell trucks when he died fighting what he called the three evils of racism, materialism, and militarism. So I don't know. They were clearly trying to appeal to black people when they were doing that. It backfired all the way. Like, that did not work. So don't use Martin Luther King to sell trucks. Don't do that. Don't use MLK's words for anything other than pushing his agenda forward. Because King's agenda is still very relevant to this day. And so I don't know who greenlit that. I know who greenlit it at from the King side of things, from the King's family side of things. But I don't know who thought that was a good idea at Dodge. It was in bad taste. Watching watching a Dodge truck trampled through the mud while King's voice is playing in the background. It's like trying to mix oil and water. It's like, it just doesn't go together. Just don't do that. And that's all I wanted to say about that. Like I said, I didn't really have much to say about it other than, like I said, like basically what other people have said. It just goes against everything that he stood for. And I'm definitely sure King wouldn't have liked that himself. So you would think that his estate and the people that control his private speeches and his private recordings, you would think they know that. And I'll just leave it at that. And so lastly, before I end this stream, I want to touch on how Donald Trump, because there were several stories. I could add really 2 stories to this. I wanted to get around to the story about that Italian drive-by shooting where some racist white supremacist Italian who ran for office at one point in time did a drive-by shooting and shot at like 6 African immigrants. I'm not going to touch on that. I might save that for Friday's show. We'll see. But I did want to touch on, and there's another story before I touch on the last story that I'm definitely going to touch on. I wanted to touch on something else. It was the story about, I can't think of it. I just lost my train of thought. But it's basically, oh yeah, another sheriff in some state. I didn't write it down because I wasn't planning on talking about it. Some state, yet another one has been caught talking about how black people need to be shot. Like, this is crazy. I did a story about this, like, what, a week ago? 2 weeks ago? And you still have, these cops who are being exposed, showing just clear as day that a lot of this stuff that is going on to people in the community is deliberate. A lot of this stuff is premeditated. It is not all subconscious, and I'm going to keep hammering that home until people get that. But I'm not going to touch on that. Again, I might touch on that Friday. I might not. It just depends. So, Trump politicized the death of Colts linebacker Edwin Jackson. And this is a continuation of Trump using black people to push his anti-immigrant agenda. This is why I spent the entire last show talking about the dangers of black nativism. This is why I dedicated so much time to that and didn't talk about anything else, because it is a trend that I am seeing. The white supremacists are going out of their way to pit black people against immigrants. And people have to push back against that. People can't take that bait. It's like it's an Admiral Akbar situation. It's a trap. It is a Jedi mind trick. And so Jackson was killed at 4 a.m. I believe he was in an Uber and he was leaving some sort of event. I'm not sure if it was a bar or a club, but he was with a friend, and his friend wasn't with him. His friend, I guess, had his own transportation. And so Edwin Jackson called an Uber. And like I said, this was on Sunday. And I guess because he had a lot to drink, he told the Uber guy that, he needed the Uber guy to pull over because he needed to throw up. And so the Uber driver and Jackson, they both got out of the car, and I guess that the car was on the side of the highway, and Edwin was puking and throwing up, and the Uber driver was probably hovering over him, trying to do whatever. And a black F-150 I'm assuming he didn't see the car, wasn't paying attention to what he was doing, and he rammed the Uber driver's car, and he ended up killing the Uber driver, and he killed the Colts linebacker, Edwin Jackson. There's nothing to suggest that this was done deliberately. That's the most important thing to take out of this right off the bat. Okay, there's nothing to suggest that he saw a couple people and decided, let me kill him. Okay, but Trump has used this situation, and he has politicized this situation in an attempt to, like I said, pit the black community against undocumented immigrants, because the driver was an undocumented immigrant. And he had actually apparently been kicked out of the country at some point in time in the past, and he found his way back into the country even after he had been kicked out. And I find it very interesting. Again, this is just Republican demagoguery and Republican double standards and just their warped sense of reality 101. Trump will, in one instance, call football players who take a knee, and I don't know if Edwin Jackson ever took a knee. That would be interesting to look that up to see if he ever took a knee. But it's mighty strange how in one instance Trump considers people like Edwin Jackson sons of bitches, and other football players SOBs. Okay, because they're taking a knee against and taking a stand against police brutality and state corruption and state violence. Yet when he sees an opportunity to use their death to his advantage, he's on that like white on rice. And that's just absolutely disgusting, family. Now, this undocumented immigrant, he should be held accountable. He's responsible for the death of 2 people. So I'm not going to sit here and say, he should be let go. No, he's responsible for the death of 2 people. He should be held accountable for that. Okay, but to sit here and pretend that this is somehow emblematic or somehow all undocumented immigrants are responsible for what this one guy did, that's ridiculous. And that is complete demagoguery. And people should not fall for that. People should not take that bait, because that is extremely dangerous. So that's all I wanted to say about that. It's really unfortunate, but that's all the stories today. I'm going to go after this live stream. I'm gonna go into my kitchen, make me some food, because I am starving right now. I feel like I have a hole in my stomach because I ate really early this morning, and now it's almost 1 o'clock and I need to eat something again. So retweet this video, retweet this live stream, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow me on Twitter @_blackintellect, @_blackintellect. Follow me on YouTube, okay, because I live stream on YouTube as well as on Periscope. On YouTube, I'm just known as Black and Intellectual. You can also follow me on Periscope. And most importantly, check out my blog and join my mailing list on my blog at www.blackandintellectual.com. So everybody, keep your head up. I hope you have a very nice day, and I am out. I will see you Friday.